in BD, what we do is we always tailor the pitch according to the person who's in front of us, right? Let's consider people building in different ecosystems other than Polygon.
Sure.
I'll point out different ecosystems, and your pitch to a person building in that ecosystem, why should they leave that ecosystem and build on Polygon instead? What is it that Polygon has that other ecosystem doesn't have?
Sure.
Yeah. First one, Solana.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is if I say anything, everyone's like, oh, you're knocking other ecosystems. But like ultimately the pitch has less to, I mean, I'll answer that in a second, but the pitch has less to do with what ecosystem they're in and more to do with what they want. So like this is how I always approach things, and I've told our BD people this first, like many times. It's like, don't look at like what you want to sell, like look at what like the dev actually needs, right? So like the answer is like, what do you want? What are you trying to do, right? And like most of the time, like what they're building is maybe some like lower level like infra stuff, but like generally you can assume it's some kind of dApp that they want like a lot of adoption on, right?
Right.
And so if you like work from that premise, then what you'll often understand is like they want to make sure that fees are low.
Right.
Okay, well, you can get that in the Polygon ecosystem. You can either get it on Polygon POS,
right,
or you could launch you could get it on ZKVM, but it's not as low as POS, or you could launch like a CDK. Second, you're going to want something that ends up being fast, right? And so like you can go to POS and you can get like very fast transactions. Right. Same thing on ZKVM, CDK. Ultimately, you want something that is like secure. And you can get that in all three ecosystems. But ultimately, like the thing that like distinguishes us from like other ecosystems, right, is like one is that we build on Ethereum, right? And so like when you look at Solana, the answer is like, I think most people in the Solana ecosystem would agree that like you are getting a more secure network in Ethereum. They would argue that it's not as performant, but you would get like a more secure network in Ethereum. And so like at the base layer, that's the core thing that we want, is like you're going to get that security. But then ultimately, like what you also want if you're an app builder is you don't want to be like impacted by other applications in any way whatsoever. Okay. Like you want to be able to like have an application and use it. And this is becoming like more and more true, right? And so like you don't get that in POS, you're impacted by everyone else. You don't get that in like ZKVM, but then you get that in CDK. So if that's like something that's important to you and you're building in like the Solana ecosystem, then what you're going to say is like, yeah, it would actually make sense to just launch a CDK. I don't have to like worry about any other application on the chain whatsoever. I don't have to worry about frankly anything because I'm in full control of that environment, but I'm still relying on the security of Ethereum. And so that's like a much better spot for like apps to be at. But then there's like a scenario in which like I could talk to a dev and I could potentially reach the conclusion that, you know, for you, like you can be like on Solana, like sure, stay there. I still think like honestly, most of the time if you're on Solana, you might as well be on Polygon POS. Why would you want to do that? Well, you've got more tooling over there. You've got like the liquidity from Ethereum and frankly like major exchanges that come into you on POS. You've got a massive diversity of apps on Polygon POS that frankly you don't have like just no other ecosystem has it whatsoever. So like I can see a world in which like I'd be like, you know what, like Solana would work for you, like that's okay. There's just because of what we've built, and at least on like the Polygon POS side so far, is that ecosystem is so broad and diverse that like if your application in any way wants to rely on the rest of the ecosystem, you've got more to rely on in the Polygon POS ecosystem than you get, frankly, almost anywhere else, including Solana. And so you're probably better off being on Polygon POS. So which Polygon protocol you use and how it compares to Solana just frankly like depends on like the developer and what their use case is. And in some worlds it's like, you know, Solana is going to be fine for you. And like you can keep building there and like, hey, you already have devs who only know Rust, then like, okay, well, probably makes sense for you to like stay there. But in other situations, like, and I think most, there is something in the Polygon ecosystem that makes more sense.
Got it. Avalanche.
I don't view the analysis as being like that different. honestly, it's like identical.
So Avalanche, Arbitrum, ZKSync, OP.
Well, I think once you get
I think there's a
once
clear
you get into
distinction.
the Ethereum ecosystem, things become different,
Right.
right? So like when you're talking about like Solana and Avalanche, like to me, like that discussion is the same
Okay.
one. You can, they're going to have different discussions, but I don't really care about their differences. Like ultimately, the difference with POS is what, and CDK and ZKVM is what matters.
Right.
Once you get to like the Ethereum ecosystem, then things start getting different, right? So like then you start needing differentiate between like, are you talking about a system that's using like fraud proofs or like validity proofs, right? And the second you get into like a fraud proof discussion, like first you talk about OP.
Proofs are not even live.
They're not live. Like it's just, it's that simple. Like I'll like say it, like optimism should not be called an L2. Like, it's literally that simple. Like it literally has less security than Polygon POS, which is not an L2, though it will be once we, upgrade it to a Validium. But it's not right now. And so to me, that's like a very comical thing, but like, honestly, kudos to them. They did a good job of like playing the Ethereum ecosystem, and they got to like the outcome that's good for them. Arbitrum's different, right? Because like Arbitrum, actually, they are good builders. They've built something that has like fraud proofs. It works well. There's actually like a good system there. The question though is, do you want to go into the Arbitrum ecosystem where they are betting on fraud proofs? And frankly, there is no viable path for them to go to anything other than fraud proofs. Like they've shown no desire to do that. And like the downside of being in that ecosystem is you are going to wait 7 days if you ever want to escape the Arbitrum ecosystem, like you're going to. If you ever want to launch like an AnyTrust chain, are you ever going to have any kind of like cross-chain transactions that are being done in like a very trust minimized way? Like the answer is no. And even if it does happen, you're going to wait like 7 days for that cross-chain transaction. So like you're going into an ecosystem that like has frankly just taken the wrong bet on the technology, even though they've done a really good job with the technology that they have. So that's like the fraud proof ecosystem, right? Then once you get to like the validity proof ecosystem, right, you're talking about like Scroll, ZKSync, Linea, and then you've got Polygon ZKVM and like CDK. And ultimately over there, like I think when you look at like what the teams have built, look, they've all built systems that have sequencers and in most cases, provers, and they work. The question then becomes, what's the difference between these ecosystems, right? And I think like big one is like our ecosystem is just much, much bigger. And so you've got a big benefit from coming into like the Polygon ecosystem. Second is like, you have to look at like, do I want to be here long term? And when you look at like the prospects of each of them, what you see is like Polygon has been a leader in ZK tech, frankly, ever since it acquired Hermes and Zero. We have probably the best ZK researchers. I mean, there's a reason why everyone uses all or a part of like Polygon, like ZK technology in their systems. And so obviously that's like a key player, because basically what that means is like we get to stay ahead of others, and therefore the ecosystem gets to stay ahead of others. And that's very important when you actually like look at like our roadmap, right? So like one of the biggest things that we're developing is kind of what we refer to as like the aggregation layer, the ag layer. And this is basically like the layer that is going to allow for interoperability between the chains. And this is going to be interoperability that's going to be like probably sub 5 seconds. And so you can actually engage with like real cross-chain transactions. So you can sit on one transaction. You never have to like worry about where the liquidity actually exists, because you can pull it from another chain. Now this has huge benefits for like the chains themselves in terms of like fees that they can generate. It also has huge benefits from like a UX perspective for like the users, because honestly, like if that was not going to happen, ultimately you would end up being like, hey, Solana, Avalanche, like that's probably a better ecosystem if you're never going to actually have like any of these chains talking to each other. And so being in the Polygon ecosystem, when you compare it to like, ZKSync, or you compare it to like Scroll, like the fact that like Polygon is the leader in ZK technology, already has this on this roadmap and moving towards its development, gives you a lot more like confidence than if you're kind of working with Scroll.